Your leadership team is meh. The culture is full of negativity. People talk about each other behind each other's back. There's a lot of backstabbing going on, gossiping like you're in school. Throw some favoritism in there. I mean, I could go on and on and on with this list. Hey y'all. Welcome to the From Surviving to Thriving podcast. You know, the place where we take the veil off and we pull the curtains back on our everyday lives. I am your host, Jackie. In today's episode, we'll discuss some of the jobs that I've had over the past 20 years. I'll share some of my experience as we look for the sign and factors when determining if it's time to move on. We'll also talk about some of the emotional effects that our jobs have on us and also how to walk away gracefully. So if that sounds like something you're looking for and you want to know when it's time to step away from that job, stick around for the rest of this episode. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to start off by giving you guys a brief little background on how my work experience started. My first job was it started out as a volunteer position at the Central YMCA in downtown Wilmington. I started volunteering at the front desk, the membership side, and I would also work on the resident side. They had an area that housed men that were trying to get back on their feet, and the resident side would assist the men that lived there, and then of course the membership side would assist the people that were coming in to use the YMCA facility. I used to volunteer on the membership side, but I would also help out on the resident side whenever they needed someone to come over and assist at the desk. And one day, the older gentleman that worked there said to me, "Why don't you see if they would hire you? Like, you're doing such a good job. You deserve to be paid. You should talk to them." I took his advice and spoke with the management team on the membership side, and they did end up bringing me on as a part-time employee because, again, I was still in high school at the time. So that was the first job that I had ever had. I worked that position throughout high school. I also went to a trade school in Delaware, shout out to Delcastle, and our school allowed us to co-op with a lot of the businesses in the area. So if you were a nurse, you would be able to go and possibly work in maybe a hospital somewhere or an office somewhere. And if you were a cosmetologist, you could probably go work in a shop. And in my case, I was in electrical power plant. Yes, I said power plant. You know, the place where boilers are operated, you know, how you get hot water in certain buildings and all that, where your HVAC and all that's kept. Yes, I worked in the power plant and I was good at it too. So over the summer, I was hired to work a co-op job at Christiana Hospital in their power plant. That was a really great experience for me because it definitely taught me that that's not the job that I wanted to do. The men, and this is probably, I can't say this is the experience that's had everywhere. It just was the experience that I had. I was a teenager in high school. I was the only girl in the shop, and of course, the only girl at the hospital. And needless to say, these older men were obnoxious. Like, yeah, I was a co-op. It's not a permanent job for me, but I don't even think they made an effort to like tone down their obnoxiousness to appease me at all. A lot of the things that they talked about definitely wasn't age appropriate for me, and I did not like the environment. So I knew from then that I didn't think that that was where I was going to end up career-wise. I did my job though, and I graduated from high school at the top of my power plant class. So let's fast forward to my college years. I decided I wanted to go to school for criminal justice. Growing up, I used to talk a lot about wanting to be a police officer. So I'm sure my younger siblings remember me saying from back then that I used to want, when I grew up, I wanted to be a police officer. So it made sense for me to look into criminal justice once I got to college. That quickly changed once I got to college though, because I realized I don't think I'm comfortable putting my life in that kind of risk. I ultimately decided to become a business major, and I still end up working with the bad guys, but just in a different sort of way. Like, I didn't have to do any hands on work with them, but I was definitely behind the scenes working to prevent a lot of things and to catch a lot of bad characters. So, even though I didn't turn out to be an actual police officer, I feel like I'm close enough. I ended up in the financial world, and I've spent the past 20 or so years working in different positions all over the financial world. I've changed roles, gotten degrees, obtained certifications, and specialized trainings in a lot of different areas, which allowed me to be able to move up to different levels in organizations. Along with those role changes came a lot of different things, which over time allowed me to realize when it was time to step away from some of those positions and move on to something else, which typically ended up being something much greater than I even intended to do. Now that we've talked about my background a little bit, let's go ahead and discuss 10 of the most common signs that it's time to leave that job. Most of these that I've chose are some of the reasons why I chose to exit stage left from some of those jobs that I've had in the past. The first one that I'd like to address is when your values no longer align with the company's values. If you start to sense that things are changing and some of the things that's happening around you, you don't necessarily agree with or feel comfortable with, it's probably time to start looking for another job. Some of those could be ethical things, and some of those could just be cultural things. Ethical meaning they're starting to cut corners or do things that you feel is against what you are comfortable with. When I'm referring to culturally, it's just you start to feel like the direction that the company is going in, you no longer fit into that space. It might have been a very relaxed space when you first got there, and now all of a sudden everything is so rigid and stuffy, and now you're like, wait, this isn't what I signed up for. That might be a big culture change that you're not comfortable with anymore. So that's a good reason to start to look for something different. Two of the roles that I've had over the years left me feeling at odds with the values of the company that I was working for, and I ultimately ended up leaving. The one that resonates the most with me right now is the first job, or I shouldn't say the first job, but the first major adult role that I had. My original employer was bought out by another company. With any merger or buyout, there's usually a lot of structural changes that happens within the company where layoffs tend to happen. And in this case, the majority of the workforce ended up getting laid off. This was early in my career. I might have been working at that job for maybe like 6 going on 7 years at the time. I'd never been through a merger before, so this was something new for me. I must say that was one of the most awful experiences of my working life. The worst part, which was kind of like a double-edged sword. Like on one hand it was good, and on the other hand it was like not good for us. Myself and my two coworkers were offered the opportunity to stay on with the company. That decision basically gave us the front row seats to watch our coworkers that had given their life to this company pack up all of their things and leave their job that they had been working for the past 20, 30 plus years. Some people had been there since they graduated high school. This was all that they knew. They had never worked for another company before. Of course, I was one of the youngest people that worked there, so my mindset about work was obviously a lot different at that time. But a lot of these people are the kind of people that start a job and stay there until they retire. So these people had invested their entire working life to this company, and now they were packing up all of their belongings and having to leave. It was heartbreaking because people were angry, rightfully so. People were crying sometimes. It was just not a good environment to be in, especially as someone who was staying on. That was so hard to watch. Being on that third floor and watching all of those cubicles just get emptied and become a ghost town was tough. That was really tough. And I don't know if that kind of made, I don't know, I believe that definitely impacted the way that I started to look at working and investing so much time in a company, because again, I was there for 7 years, or almost 7 years at the time. Nowadays, people don't stay at jobs for, at least people my age, we don't stay at jobs for more than maybe 2, 3 years. To be working at the same company for 6 years, that was a long time. Needless to say, that's the longest I ever worked in for any company after that. And thinking about it now, that I'm sure that had a lot to do with the way that I started to operate as an employee going forward. Now, the new company that took over, they did not have the same values that we had as a hometown bank. We were no longer able to provide our customers with the same level of service that we were used to doing. My group that I worked with, we would be on first name basis with a lot of the clients that we had. We knew when we picked up the phone exactly who we were going to talk to at the company we were calling, and when they called us, they knew exactly who they were going to talk to. So not being able to provide them that same level of service felt like a disservice to them and coming from us. As we started to join forces with the new company, it was very clear that the way that they operated was totally different from the way that we were used to. We were also getting the feedback from our clients because they also had to adjust to the changes that were coming from the new company based on the level of service that they were now getting. With all the changes, I started to realize like this is probably not a company that I am comfortable working for long term. And one of the things that really bothered me too was the fact that they wanted to change the roles that we were operating under, which we totally get. This is, you guys are taking over. You want to implement the changes that you currently have, but it definitely put us at a disadvantage. We were definitely getting the redheaded stepchildren treatment. I was really trying my best to stick it out, but after a while, it really just became unbearable for me. It also didn't help that the manager, and I want to say it was the assistant manager at the time. So the manager was a white lady. The assistant manager was a black guy. And she thought it was so funny. She thought it was funny to joke about the fact that we should get together. Like, I just didn't understand that rationale at all. Like, he's my supervisor in a sense, but you're jokingly talking about us dating. Yeah, no. I've never in my entire life dated anyone that I work with. Like, I always felt like that was just not something that I was comfortable doing. I never wanted to play where I work or work where I play, or however you want to call it. That just mixing business with pleasure. Yeah, mixing business with pleasure just wasn't something that I was interested in doing. That to me was a little off-putting, and I felt like there were some boundaries that were being overstepped, which made me pretty uncomfortable, and ultimately I left the company. So that was an example of my values and the company values kind of clashing a little bit. The next reason that you should consider moving on to something else is for your own personal reasons. Sometimes you decide you want to make some personal life changes, and that's okay. Sometimes you have a goal of living in a certain location or just moving in general for a reason that doesn't necessarily align with where your company is located. Most people that know me know that I am a mover. I'm all over the place. I don't even want to tell y'all the amount of times I have moved since 2012. My family members and friends know that at any point they could get a phone call that says, hey, I just moved to X, or I'm about to move to Y. I am never the type of person that shy away from starting over and exploring a new place and meeting new people and starting a life somewhere. That doesn't scare me at all. So, relocation or moving for personal reasons has been the case in a lot of the resignations that I've had over the years, or it was just a benefit of something else happening. And I'm like, you know what? Since I'm gonna leave this job, I might as well just move to another place altogether. The role that brought me to Virginia was a relocation from Delaware. Then I resigned from my Virginia role to move to Georgia. And it's not that the role in Virginia was bad at all. I really enjoyed the company that I worked for because I ended up leaving Virginia, working for them, and then going to Georgia to work for them. So it definitely had nothing to do with the company. It was more so the environment. I really wanted a change of scenery, and I was on a mission down the East Coast. I landed on Georgia out of just waking up after the new year in 2023, and I said to God, like, listen, I need you to lead me where you want me to go next. And this is typically a conversation that we have a lot over my lifetime. I do tend to get to certain points and then pause and say, hey, show me where you want me to go next. So I was on the way to work one day, and I was like, just give me some signs. I don't know if y'all do this, but I was in the car talking to God, and I'm like, just show me some signs. Give me something. Let me know where you want me to go. Wherever you say go, I'm going to go. And out of nowhere, a car with a Georgia license plate pulled out in front of me. No joke. So later that day or that week, I reached out to my cousin who lived in Georgia. And Georgia has always been some place that I was curious about, but I'd never been there. So I really didn't know if it was exactly what I was going to, want it to be. But that's where I felt like God was leading me. So I called my cousin. Is it okay for me to come visit? He said yes. And by February, I was in Georgia. I spent a few days with him. And 3 months later, I was packing up my truck and moving to Georgia. Sometimes the personal need could be due to family, where we might need to take care of a child, an elder family member, or even a spouse. We may need to take a reduction in travel time, or even some health needs of your own. Jobs are not always able to accommodate all of these requests, and that sometimes leads you to have to make the decision to resign and move on to something else. Yes, that's sometimes the hard part of the decision, but just know these changes most of the time brings you to something greater. Another part of the personal reasons to think about is sometimes you're working in a career and you decide that you found your true purpose in life. And what you thought was your purpose all along does not align with what it is that you're trying to accomplish now. That will lead you to make some changes, and that may mean that you need to leave the current role that you're in and move to a different role, or that sometimes mean that you might be switching to a whole nother industry or even a whole nother place. Having that open mind and willingness to make the change could prove to be so rewarding. Another reason that it may be time for you to move on to another role is when your job starts to become unfulfilling. If the job that you're doing starts to become boring, for lack of a better word, uninterested, it's not challenging you anymore, it's definitely time to think about switching to something different. A lot of times that causes you to basically just go through the motions of your job and just doing just enough to get by. You're not pushing yourself anymore. You're not looking to take on anything new because there might not be anything new available. Or you're just losing interest because it's not fulfilling whatever it is intrinsically that you're looking for. So it's time. It's time to find something that piques your interest and pushes your brain a little bit. The job that comes to mind when I think about not being fulfilled is a role that I had gotten when I lived in South Florida. I initially interviewed for a temporary role. The people that I interviewed with were super nice, great people. They loved me. They asked me if I would, instead of coming on as a contractor, possibly coming on full time. I feel like they knew that this could possibly be a little bit too much of a step back from what I'm used to doing, but they still wanted to give me the opportunity. And I agreed. I accepted the role. The company was great. My coworkers, they were awesome people. It is probably one of the best places that I've worked as far as company wise. Everyone kind of knew each other, which I really liked that small office feel, but I could not get past the fact that I was not being challenged. The role did not require for me to do a lot of thinking or analyzing or creating. And I think something that makes me tick, which I've realized over time, especially, the more roles I took on, I realized that it's important for me to be in a role that allows me to create things, develop processes, create policy, like procedures, things like that make me tick. I love to take on a project and fix things. I like to look at a process and figure out what's wrong with the process and a better way to do it. I like to make things more efficient. Those are the things that I feel is fulfilling for me as a role. And unfortunately, this job did not do that for me. I felt like I was coming to work every day, and even though they were happy with the work that I was producing for them, I wasn't feeling fulfilled at all. I believe I stayed in that role for maybe 2 months, and I just could not see myself doing it anymore. So I knew it was time to look for something else and move on. That was probably one of the jobs that I found the hardest to leave because they were so nice. They were genuinely good people. And you don't always find a workplace where there's not pettiness and cattiness and this and that. Like, there was none of that. Everyone was so good to each other and so nice and so friendly. I really hated leaving there, but I could not stay. Now, let's talk about one of the worst work environments to be in. Say it with me, everyone. A toxic work environment. Yes. Being in a toxic work environment is not only detrimental to you mentally, it could be emotionally, it could be physically, it could just be an overall horrible experience. Depending on the level of severity or the level of toxicity in the job, it can be a lot to deal with. Let me just define what I mean by a toxic work environment. And I mean in the sense of your leadership team is meh. The culture is full of negativity. People talk about each other behind each other's back. There's a lot of backstabbing going on, undermining of each other, gossiping like you're in school. Just a lot of unprofessional and inappropriate behavior happening. Throw some favoritism in there. some disrespectful people in leadership and to each other. I mean, I could go on and on and on with this list. Those are some of the characteristics of a toxic work environment. And all of those things can start to take a toll on you mentally and can start to push you to have a level of stress and even to burnout. Having poor leadership in the work environment is one of the biggest problems that I've noticed in a lot of the corporate jobs that I've had. I've seen a lot of companies lose really great teammates, hard workers, top performers, just because the management and the leadership team is just horrible. They're not supportive. They do not look out for their teammates. They're too busy trying to undermine each other or outdo each other. Like, I've seen some crazy things, but a leadership team can make or break a good organization. And I think a lot of the times people get put into leadership roles that do not belong in them. Just because someone's a good performer or a top performer does not mean that they need to be a manager. And I think a lot of companies like, oh, this person's our top performer, they should go and manage a team. No, bad idea. Some people don't even want to be managers and they're put into leadership roles that they're not ready for. They don't understand how to deal with or talk to people. And then it creates such a negative environment that the teammates that they manage end up leaving. So having bad leadership and managers is toxic in a workplace. It's so unfortunate that the bad managers typically tend to outnumber the good ones. And I've had some good managers throughout my career. But when I think back overall, the number of bad managers definitely outdo the number of the good ones. And that says a lot about how they put people in those leadership roles. I have to laugh because every time I think about this job, it's like it started out bad from the beginning. I had a job at a company in South Florida. Right after I left the last company I spoke about, which I left because I wasn't being fulfilled. I don't know, maybe I was getting a little bit of punishment for taking the job and then leaving, because this one was definitely the worst job I've ever had in my entire 20 years of having jobs. So I think about this job sometimes and it really makes me laugh at myself now. This job, I was contacted by a recruiter. We spoke about the role. I asked several questions about what I would be doing. It was a full-time role, which was great because I really wanted a full-time position. I didn't want something that was a contract. And the recruiter spoke so highly about the job. I was looking forward to it. It was exactly what I thought I needed at that time. So the first day of work came. It was sometime in June, right before my birthday. And I went to the orientation. And as soon as we sat down and started talking and listening to what we were going to be expected to do and started reviewing things, each day of orientation, it became clearer and clearer that the recruiter lied to all of us. We were sitting in that class, and I've met some really great people there who I'm still friends with. Shout out to Nadenza and shout out to the Coral Springs group. You guys know who you are. We met, and I think we probably all bonded over the fact that we got. Because the job that we were being told about is not the same job we were hired by the recruiter for. The expectations was exactly opposite of what he said it was. So we all were sitting in that class like, this is not what I signed up for. But we were already there. We had already left our other jobs, and this was our new job. So we literally had to make the best of what we had at the moment. And trust me, it was downhill from there. Most of us from orientation that bonded ended up on the same team with the same manager. And this is one of the worst managers that I've ever had in my life. Now, the director was great. Her and I get along fine. The manager, I think she came in with the mindset that she was going to try to dominate us, which probably wasn't a good idea from the start. I don't know if she felt like she had something to prove to us, because the attitude that she came in with was not okay. She thought it was a good idea to flex her position on the floor a lot. She also did not have any tact. She did not know how to speak to people. And at that point in my life, I wasn't really the type of person that she should do that with. I'm not very good at taking disrespect from anyone, really. I was taught to not be disrespectful to people, and I always show respect until I'm disrespected. So her coming in hot, and I mean hot, was a bit disrespectful. And at one point, I remember her doing something that really, really caused me to react to her in a not good way in front of others. She was disrespectful on the floor, and I just gave her back what she gave me. So from that point on, she knew not to really try me, but I still, like, I'm a professional person. So for me to have to stoop down to that level, that wasn't okay with me either. I'm a firm believer in your position does not dictate the level of respect that you get. The respect that you give others dictate what you get back. If you are a respectful person, people will be respectful back to you. But if you feel the need to be disrespectful, then you have to expect some level of disrespect back. And to be honest with you, I don't think any job is worth me being disrespected in any way. I've resigned from positions for less. So that level of disrespect is unacceptable coming from a manager. I think from that experience, she learned that there's a right way and a wrong way to speak to people, especially in the presence of others. You don't tell people what to do, even though you're the manager, right? Even though I have teammates that I manage, I try to never tell them what to do. I believe you ask people to do things for you. When you ask someone to do something, they're more inclined to do it than when you try to tell them what to do. And yeah, that's a little bit of the psychology working, but if that's what it takes to have that level of respect for your teammates, do it. At the end of the day, a lot of the times they're probably just agreeing or accepting to do certain things because their manager is asking them to do it. But I'm not going in there just saying, all right, you do this and you do that and you do that. No, it's more like, hey, how do you feel about taking this on? Is it okay for you to do this? That's the type of respect that you show to your teammate. And then they'll be willing to cross the mountain and the rivers and everything that you need them to do, because you're talking to them with the level of respect that you would expect from them. The best part, like I mentioned earlier, of that experience was just the people that I met that I'm still friends with now. And the reason why I even have my cams is because of my friend Adenza. I think just from us realizing that we were God that day, we ended up becoming friends, and she had told me about the exam that she was about to take. And I'd heard of the cams, but I never even thought to go sign up for it and study for the test. but she mentioned, hey, I'm signed up and I'm going to be studying for the test. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should sign up for this test and, just do it. Next thing you know, I was signed up, we were studying, and months later, I had my CAM certification. So if there's nothing that I got from that negative, toxic experience, was the fact that I got a lifelong friend. My certification came out of that process. And by me getting my certification, that propelled me into a lot of the other roles that came after this job. So yeah, it was a bad experience, but would I change it? No, because I don't think I would have went to the levels that I went to in the time frame that I did had I not gone through that situation. So everything do happen for a reason. The good, the bad, the toxic, it all happened to get me to where I am now. The next thing to think about when it comes to knowing when to step away from your job is if you start to feel like you're mentally and emotionally detached from the role. And this is meaning typically you're so happy and excited when you get a new job. I know I am. I'm getting up early every day and I'm looking forward to the role and I'm, enjoying learning something new. After a while, that getting up early and being excited definitely starts to fizzle out, but you should still have some sort of engagement when it comes to your work. If you feel like you're starting to not care so much about your job, you're not excited about being there, your bad days are now outnumbering your good days, it's definitely time to start looking for a new role. The next one that I'm about to talk about is something that I've noticed a lot recently. I feel like companies tend to neglect this. And it's when your teammates or your employees start to feel undervalued. That's never a good place for you as a company because that's when your people will start to leave. People are not going to stay at a company where they don't feel like their contributions are recognized, noticed, compensated, and it doesn't always have to be money. And I think a lot of the times companies fail to realize that people sometimes just want to hear that you recognize something that they've done. In a big call, say their name, say thank you, say what they've contributed to a project. Acknowledge their work. For a lot of people, that's enough. For others, money is the motivator, especially if they're underpaid to begin with and the way that the economy is operating and things are so expensive, people want to get their pay increased. So if we know that, hey, somebody is not getting paid as much as they should be, that should be an automatic, like, dang, we need to do better, especially if this person is a top performer. You want to keep your good teammates happy. Like, I don't understand why that's not a no-brainer for most companies. And of course, giving people the promotions that they deserve is common sense. If someone is busting their butts, if someone is contributing so much to the betterment of the organization, give them the promotion. Like all these little nuanced rules, like, oh, you have to be in this position for this long, or you can't apply, or you can't move, I feel like a lot of that is just workplace politics and bullcrap. Like, put people in the role that they deserve. Pay people the amount that they deserve. And give them the title and the accolades that they deserve. It's even worse when you see other people that are not deserving getting things, and then the people who actually deserve it don't. It's mind-boggling, it's frustrating. It also creates an environment where people feel they're undervalued. And guess what they do? They head for the door. So if you feel like you're undervalued, that's a great reason to go somewhere where you feel like you're going to be valued. Number 7, I'm not going to spend way too much time on just because I have a whole episode on burnout. Episode 2 talks about my experience with burnout. But another reason why people leave jobs is because It has poor work-life balance, which ends up leading to burnout for a lot of people. So if you're in a role where you're overworked constantly and you're pouring into your work so much that you start to neglect your own personal care, you don't have time for your family and your friends, and you're doing too much and not getting enough out of it, it's time to look for a new job. That increased level of stress and pressures from work, it only adds up over time and ends up being a strain on your mental and your physical. And if you continue to do that, you will end up in a state of burnout. And if you're not sure what burnout is, you can check out episode 2 on my experience with burnout. Number 8 is the financial stability of the company. If your company starts to lay people off and are handing out pay cuts left and right, then they're showing signs of financial instability. That's typically a good sign that you might want to start looking for something that's more secure. Sometimes it's not clear to us that are on the lower hierarchy of the business what exactly the company's doing or the financial position that they're in. And sometimes we don't even find out exactly what's going on until the rest of the public finds out. An example of this was when Wilmington Trust went under back in 2010, 2011. A lot of people that worked for the bank was not aware of the financial situation of the bank. It was news to a lot of us when we found out the financial strain that the bank was in. We had heard rumblings here and there throughout the bank about loans and things that weren't going great, but I don't think we understood the gravity of what that meant, especially since I can recall us having a town hall meeting and they were talking about the status of the bank. And I don't remember them saying that we were about to be bought out. Instead, they told us the opposite. We can always depend on the leadership of our organization to be upfront because sometimes it's all smoke and mirrors. The next one on the list, number 9, is when you leave your current role because you happen to find a better job opportunity that fulfills the things that your family, your personal, your financial, all of those needs. So I always believe the best time to find a good job is when you already have a job. And I know most people, when they have a job, their instinct isn't to start looking for another role, especially when you just start out in your new role. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, at some point, once you've been settled into your current role and things start, to get stable, it's okay to start thinking about, hey, are there things out there that might pique my interest or could be better suited? Yeah, I know the grass ain't always green on the other side and all that, but I feel like when it comes to your career, you should never just be solely stuck on one company. And the reason why I say that is because of past experiences where, companies merge, companies go under. Sometimes people choose to lay people off. So I do feel like keeping up with your resume, making sure that your skills are sharpened all the time. You're getting some sort of certification if they're out there. You're taking some sort of training classes. Like all of these things will boost your resume, and when you are applying for your next role will look even better, and you can use those as negotiating tools, right? The worst time I feel to look for a job is when you don't have a job, because then you're in a sense of like desperation mode, or if you hate your job and you're just willing to just jump out the frying pan and into the fire. That's never the best route to go. Don't put blinders on, is what I'm saying. You don't have to be actively looking for a role, but keep your eyes open, is basically the point. In the same vein, this one, number 10, hits home for a lot of people. And that happened to me in a few of the roles that I've had in the past. Most people, when they get into a role, they want to learn everything about it. They want to conquer the role and move on to the next level. And a lot of times in the industry that I'm in, that means you're either going to move into leadership or you're going to go sideways and work in maybe another department or take on some projects or just change of title. Personally, I've always felt like the longest I want to stay in the same exact role is 2 years, maybe a little over 2 years. But once you start hitting that 3 year mark and you're still in the same role that you started in, I feel like I'll start to get a little antsy and want to do something different. So whether it's you need to move up, you need to move around, or you're gonna need to move out. For people like me, you want to get challenged. You want to be learning something new. You want to be taking on additional responsibilities. And if we're not presented with that opportunity to do that, then we're going to start to feel like we're stagnant and there's no development happening. And a lot of the times we end up outgrowing the role that we're in. If that's the case and you feel like you're being overlooked for things that you're more than qualified for, then it's also probably time to start looking for something elsewhere. The final one that I want to share is a personal rule of mine. And I'm not sure when I came up with this rule about work, but at some point in my career, I decided that if I ever have to cry at work about work-related situations, because sometimes something happens to us personally and we just happen to be in a workspace and you're crying about it, that's fine. But if you ever find yourself at work crying about work-related things, it is definitely time for you to consider stepping away from work. We should not have to cry about our jobs. And over the past year or so, I've found myself being in a situation where I've been emotional at work and crying in regards to work stuff. So if there's one rule that I will continue to follow is to stick to my rule that the day that I cry at work, that's the day that I'm walking away. Now that we know the signs to look for when you should be thinking about moving to a new role, let's talk about how you should do it gracefully. Walking from a role comes with its own set of emotions. Knowing when to do it is important, but also knowing how to do it is just as important. It's best to do it with a level of respect and, of course, honesty. When you work in a specialized industry like I do, it's very easy to run into people that you've worked with on an interview. Or even if you don't run into the person, it's very possible that they know someone that knows someone that you worked with, or that person that you worked with them, or they're even friends. So it's a very small world when it comes to some industries. So leaving a job on a bad term is never a good look, because the person that's interviewing you can make a quick phone call to such and such that knows that they know that you worked with in the past, and they can get some feedback on you super easy. Whether that's the right thing to do or not doesn't matter. It's just the fact of the matter that actually happens. So when you're considering leaving a job, try to do it in the most respectful way possible, because you never know when it might come back to haunt you. To do that, there's some things that you should consider doing when you're deciding to step away from a position. And sometimes we don't always have the convenience or the time to do all of these things, but if you do, do it. Try to have a meeting with your manager. or teammates or whoever you feel it's important for them to know what your decision is that you're leaving. If they'll be affected by this decision in any way, it might be a good idea to have a conversation with them. It's important to be direct, respectful, and honest with the people that you're meeting with. That way they know what your decision is. Like, you're not beating around the bush about things. And even though you don't have to give them the full reason why you're leaving unless you really want to, it's good to still try to be as honest as you possibly can be. Sometimes leaving the company with some areas of improvement feedback could be beneficial for the team that you're leaving. It may be helpful to hear from someone why they're walking away. Maybe it's things that can be improved and that can stop other teammates from leaving. So I do feel like a level of honesty is good in that sense. That way improvements can be made. You always want to offer to help with the transition because, of course, depending on what your role is, someone might not be ready or even capable of taking over right away. So if you have the ability to stay and transition someone into your role, it will not only be beneficial for the team, but it also make your transition out a lot less painful for everyone. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure you don't want to blow everything up while you're leaving, unless that's really your intention, to blow everything up while you're leaving. Be ready to hear different reactions for your reason for leaving. I've had a director give me my letter of resignation back and told me to hold on to it. Even though I did not, it was interesting that he decided he wasn't going to accept it. That was an interesting reaction. So be ready for any kind of reaction that you might get. Some people are going to be genuinely happy for you that you may be moving on to something greater, or you've made a choice that you feel is best for you. Some people will be upset, and that's okay because you're also doing what you feel is best for you still. Either way, know that it's okay for them to feel the way that they're feeling and just accept that that's how they feel, but you still have to do what is best for you. You definitely want to follow up in writing because it's not real unless it's in writing. So make sure you have that letter and you push send on that email or you hand it to someone. After you've left the company, it's never a good idea to bash the company that you've just left. Of course, if there's grievances that you have, be discreet about how you share that. Like, you don't want to go on social media and blast the company and blast the management and everyone that you hate. Never a good idea. However, if you know a friend that came to you and asked you for your honest opinion, by all means, share your honest opinion. It's always good to end things on a much positive note and keep it that way. You always want to preserve your professional network because you never know when you may need them, when you may run into these people again. So stay positive. As I wrap this episode, it's very important to think about not only the practical side of making a decision this big, but also the emotional effects that comes with leaving a job. It really is a big, serious decision that should not be taken lightly. On the emotional side, you definitely want to recognize when a job no longer aligns with your values, your beliefs, or it's affecting your well-being. If you find yourself constantly drained, unfulfilled, or anxious, it's time to evaluate your situation and see if it's time to move on to a new role. Remember, your mental health should always take precedence over any job. It's always okay to prioritize your happiness and seek a work environment where you feel appreciated, you feel safe, you feel secured, and at the same time inspired and motivated. And on the practical side of things, assessing your financial situation and your career goals, that is just as important. You can decide to make plans to go back to school and further your education, maybe take on a new job opportunity, or even take a break. Sometimes a break is needed. And knowing that looking for a new job and taking a new step and resigning from a position is going to give you new opportunities for growth, relocation, starting over, creating a new life for yourself. So there's a lot of positives to that decision. At the end of the day, it's not an ending. I tend to look at it as a new beginning for something else. Yes, I'm closing one chapter, but I'm opening a brand new one. Trust yourself when it comes to this decision. If the thought has come to you multiple times and you have that fear of starting over or even just moving on to something new, it's okay. Trust yourself. Step out on faith. You are creating a new opportunity for yourself, a chance for you to start something new. Maybe even do something that you've never done before. Maybe embrace something that you've always been curious about. The fun part is you don't know how it's going to play out, but the only way to actually find out is to start, get up and do it. So go ahead, close that chapter and get ready to start the new one. Tune into next week's episode where we will explore ways of dismantling that strong, have it all together persona. I hope that you found this episode on knowing when to step away from a job to be informative. Hopefully it will help you recognize that it's time for you to step into something better and more aligned with your path. If you found this to be valuable, don't forget to like, drop a comment below, share this episode with someone, and subscribe so you don't miss any more episodes. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next episode.